Welcome to Friday's edition of Everything Yesterday This Morning. An economic shock just hit the housing market. When the pandemic struck 2 years ago, the Federal Reserve did everything it could to combat the COVID recession. That included cutting its benchmark interest rate to zero. Lower interest rates incentivized businesses to invest and borrow cheap money. It also encouraged buyers to jump into the housing market. Those days are gone. Sing the song. Those days are gone. No, I'm just kidding. You don't want to hear me sing. Now the Federal Reserve has changed focus from helping the economy recover to getting inflation under control. By the central bank raising rates last week, the average 30-year fixed rate mortgage rate spiked from 3.11% in December to 4.16% as of last week. That upward swing is not over. As of Wednesday, the average 30-year fixed rate mortgage rate is now 4.52%. The real estate industry knew that the rates were increasing, but they did not expect them to be this high. A borrower who took a loan at $500,000 at the 3.11% rate would get a monthly mortgage payment of $2,138. With the hike, that jumps to $2,433. If rates this week do cross that 4.5% threshold, the payment increases to $2,533. If you are or were planning to buy or sell your home, you better do it before the next Federal Reserve meeting. Isn't that funny that 13 individuals control how much you pay for your home? The Biden administration prepares sweeping change to the asylum process. The administration has finalized a plan to overhaul the system for immigrants seeking asylum in the United States, aiming to take the burden off of the backlogged immigration courts in what some experts see as the most sweeping change to the process in a quarter century. Under the new policy, some migrants seeking asylum will have their claims heard and evaluated by asylum officers instead of immigration judges. The goal is for the entire process to take 6 months, compared with a current average of about 5 years. The plan is to release many asylum seekers through a parole status while they go through the process, which in the past, they have received ankle monitors as they travel out so that they can continue to be tracked. However, now they're receiving nice, crisp, fresh in the box iPhones with an application to track them because they were cutting the bracelets off, but now they'll keep a hold of these cell phones. The app uses facial recognition technology so that when you're pinged, you have to take a photograph and it geolocates where you're at. Apparently, none of these migrants are going to throw these phones away or sell them, but I digress. Critics say this will draw even more hopeful migrants to the border. In recent weeks, border officials have been apprehending more than 13,000 migrants a day. Biden pledged to, quote, restore humanity to the asylum process, but the need to fix the overburdened system, where currently, as of the end of February, more than 670,000 cases were pending in the immigration court alone. This long predates the last administration. This new rule comes as border officials try to manage a record number of migrants crossing the border. Thousands of migrants in the country illegally are already being released, many with plans to apply for asylum. With the plan to be operational, the government needs to hire hundreds of new asylum workers to handle approximately 75,000 asylum seekers per year. Mayorkas issued a statement and said, quote, through this rule, we are building a more functional and sensible asylum system to ensure that individuals who are eligible will receive protection more swiftly, while those who are not eligible will be rapidly removed. Immigration advocates raised concerns about speeding and rushing migrants through the process and denying them due process. If they do not pass the credible fear interview, an immigration judge will then review the case. Rushing asylum seekers through adjudications without sufficient time to secure legal representation, gather evidence, or prepare their cases is inefficient and counterproductive, said Eleanor Acer, who is the senior director of the Refugee Protection at Human Rights First. Speaking of refugees, the United States is about to welcome up to 100,000 Ukrainians fleeing war amid a broader aid effort. The United States also pledged $1 billion in new humanitarian aid. According to this article, more than 3.5 million people have fled Ukraine since the beginning of the invasion. United States lawmakers and advocates have urged Biden to do more to help those seeking refuge in the United States. The current effort to allow more Ukrainians into the U.S. is part of a broader series of aid measures announced by the Biden administration on Thursday, including $1 billion in new funding towards humanitarian assistance to support people still in Ukraine and those affected by the global impacts of Russia's war. The Biden administration will launch a new democracy and human rights program that aims to provide at least $320 million in new funding to defend human rights in Ukraine and neighboring countries. The program will document and preserve evidence of potential war crimes being committed in Ukraine. The United States wants to ensure that women, children, LGBTQ individuals, and other potentially vulnerable groups have access to food, clean water, shelter, and medical care. So you're going to pay through your nose for Ukrainians to have access to these basic staples while inflation, food shortages, a collapsing housing market, and skyrocketing gas overwhelm you. But it's for the greater good, and you should be happy to sacrifice. AGCO CEO says Russia-Ukraine war potential consequences on global food supply is a really big deal. Diminished food supply resulting from Russia's invasion of Ukraine has potential consequences beyond empty stomachs, Eric Hensosha said. 13% of the global calories that are consumed came out of production when Russia invaded Ukraine. This is a really big deal, he said, because when that volume of calories comes out of the food chain, it triggers other things, not only hunger, but unrest. The last time we had this kind of disruption, it was one of the major triggers for the Arab Spring. The Russia-Ukraine war has put pressure on farmers globally to produce more crop to make up for a gap in supply left by the two countries. As prices of wheat rise, so do prices of fuel and fertilizer, that further drive up costs for farmers. Kramer warned earlier this week that wheat and corn futures would continue to rise and urged investors to invest in a basket of ag stocks with AGCO earning a spot on that list. Hensosha said that AGCO is prioritizing helping farmers increase their crop without exhausting their limited supply or making purchases that could eat into their profits. He added that the company's investment into technology first, like Apex AI and Green Eye Tech, as well as its acquisition of Appareo Systems, has helped. As far as the company's business operations in Russia and Ukraine, the chief executive said the company has prioritized their employees' safety and that many were moved to the safer part of the country or across the border. Hundreds have been part of that process, and another priority has been helping the farmers in that area stay productive. The company's stock rose 1.34% on Thursday. This is not investment advice. I'm just letting you know that the company's out there and that's some of the moves that are being made. Donald Trump sues Hillary Clinton over the 2016 Russian collusion allegations. The lawsuit covers a long list of grievances that the Republican former president repeatedly aired during his 4 years in the White House after beating Clinton, and comes as he continues to falsely claim, according to this article, that his 2020 election defeat by Biden was the result of widespread fraud. The suit alleges racketeering and a conspiracy to commit injurious falsehood, among other claims. The suit seeks compensatory and punitive damages. Trump said he was, quote, forced to incur expenses in an amount to be determined at trial, but known to be in excess of $24 million and continuing to accrue in the form of defense costs, legal fees, and related expenses. Jeff Grell, a lawyer who specializes in racketeering cases, said that Trump may have waited too long to bring his claims. They are governed by a 4-year statute of limitations, but there is a large dispute on when that period begins. Some additional defendants, a additional defendant in Trump's lawsuit includes Christopher Steele, who wrote the dossier that was paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign and given to the FBI to warrant a investigation into Russian ties for the former president. So wouldn't it be interesting that Hillary's final fall comes from a lawsuit from Donald Trump? Anyway. Putin ally warns of nuclear dystopia due to the United States. Dmitry Medvedev, who used to be Russia's president from 2008 to 2012, said that the United States has conspired to destroy Russia as part of a primitive game since the 1991 fall of the Soviet Union. He warned that the world could spiral towards a nuclear dystopia if they continue to press on with what the Kremlin casts as a long-term plot to destroy Russia. Medvedev gives an insight into the thinking within the Kremlin as Moscow faces the biggest confrontation with the West since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. The U.S. has repeatedly said that it does not want the collapse of Russia and that its own interests are best served by a prosperous, stable, and open Russia. I'm sorry, what? That is a direct quote from the article. I cannot help but call bullshit, as the decisions that have been made over the last month would clearly say otherwise. It is interesting to note, though, that the United States is still very, very cozy with Russia in an attempt to get the Iran nuclear deal passed. Why are they still working with Russia in one hand and completely attempting to destroy them on the other? Oh, man. Medvedev says the Kremlin would never allow the destruction of Russia, but warned Washington that if it did achieve what he characterized as its destructive aims, when the world could face a dystopian crisis that would end in a big nuclear explosion. He also said the destruction of the world's biggest country by area could lead to an unstable leadership in Moscow, with a maximum number of nuclear weapons aimed at targets in the United States and Europe. As I told you guys last week, a frightening number of people in this country are okay with advocating for actions against Russia that could lead to a nuclear response, and Russia is likely to acquiesce if we are not careful. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a GIF is worth 1,000,000. The image file format has been a defining element of internet culture for decades, with glass raising DiCaprios and mic dropping Obamas facilitation self-expression in a faceless digital world, and we owe our gratitude for all the jokes, snark, and praise to Stephen Wilhite, the inventor of the GIF, who died last week at the age of 74. He lived in Milford, Ohio, and contracted COVID 19 weeks before his death, 2 weeks before his death, actually. He was a lifelong coder who created the GIF in 1987 while working at CompuServe. The compressed image files were useful at a time when internet connections dragged. You think of like the old AOL, like Wilhite invented the GIF all by himself at home and brought it to work after he perfected it. He would figure everything out privately in his head and then go to town programming it on the computer, his wife said. It was his proudest achievement, creating the GIF. The same year, an update led to animated graphics. I think the first GIF was a picture of a plane. It was a long time ago, he told the Daily Dot in 2012. According to Jiffy, this is correct. Wilhite worked for CompuServe until 2001 after he had had a stroke. Meanwhile, GIF's popularity took off on early social media sites like MySpace. By 1996, the dancing baby image, one of Wilhite's favorites, was plastered across the web and attached to emails. That year, Will Hite received a Webby Lifetime Achievement Award. For those who would like to honor Will Hite's memory, there are plenty of GIFs that pay tribute to the inventor. Perhaps even better, you can heed his unequivocal advice and pronounce it GIF instead of GIF. That is Friday's edition of Everything Yesterday This Morning. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. If you want to join us this evening, we'll be on Liberty Happy Hour at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Otherwise, I will see you on Monday. You guys take care.